Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this peer seminar. My name is Qing Cheng. I am the director of the PolyU Academy for Interdisciplinary Research, or peer. Today is my great pleasure to introduce our seminar speaker, Professor HUANG Dejian, who is professor and deputy head of the Department of Food Science and Technology at the National University of Singapore. So Professor HUANG is an expert in functional foods and plant-based proteins. His work spans a wide range of areas, including the chemistry of bioactive natural compounds, cultivated meat engineering, 3D food bioprinting, and the upcycling of the agri-food side streams into nutraceutical and functional food. So Professor HUANG places a very strong emphasis on the real-world impact through the close industrial and collaboration and active knowledge transfer. His team has established impactful spin-off advanced sustainable agri-circular and alternative protein solutions. Those efforts have translated into products on the market, including the famous WZW noodles. Well, I hope one day I could eat that. I heard that you can eat this without producing the sugar, and it will be very good really after lunch. And this noodle, which we'll definitely hear more today, and are zero starch noodles made from the spent barley grains. Oh, that's why I now know what is going on from the brewing and malt industries. So Professor HUANG's work amplifies how cutting-edge food technology can be leveraged to deliver healthier, more sustainable food solutions while addressing global challenges in nutrition and resources efficiency. So I just learned during lunch, Professor HUANG and I also had some overlap during our time at MIT. And it's also my country fellowman from Fujian province. So let's really give a very special relationship. Thank you very much. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcoming Professor HUANG.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's my great honor to have this opportunity to give a seminar at the PAL. And I really thank Professor Chen and Professor HUANG and also Professor Gang for a kind invitation to give me this opportunity. And in today's seminar, I would like to share our research on two topics all related to proteins, actually. The first one is talking about sustainable plant proteins. And then after that, I will talk about the noodle, which is the functional staple food. I have one head, but I wear multiple hats. And so I belong to this Department of Food Science and Technology. But I also a researcher in the Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein, as well as the director of medical and health science innovation platform at our NUS Suzhou Research Institute. And for those who have been to Singapore, you may be familiar with this picture, which is our university town. In Singapore, our university town, the whole town belongs to NUS. Very different from the university town in this part of the world or in China, where there are multiple universities occupying much larger areas. And so this our university town is very modern, and the facilities are great you see the students not only can study, but you see there are lots of bodybuilding and exercise rooms, and also study rooms and restaurants and canteens. So integrating the study together with living in under one roof, we call it university town. It is actually 网红打卡地, those who visit our university, I welcome you to go to visit university town and take some images. It's a great place to be. And so I belong to Food Science Technology Department. It's a young department. NUS is over 100-year-old, 120-year anniversary, actually. But our department only started in 1999, which is 27 years ago, initially as a program under the chemistry department. And only in 2020, we became an independent department. I learned that PolyU's Food Science and Nutrition Department started 3 years later, so it's our younger brother. So we have a lot in common. That was what I learned in the past week of my visit in PolyU. We certainly need to strengthen such a close working relationship. Our department, very much like PolyU's department, our vision is to be a global leader in education and research in the field of food science and technology and nutrition. And our mission is to nurture future leaders in food industry and enhancing the well-being of our community. And recently, our Singapore as a nation have selected urban agriculture and food security as the future of the country. So heavily invested in this area. And our university also did the same. We are building this a very fancy building called agriculture, aquaculture, and food tech. We call it A2FT for the time being, but the final official name will be announced very soon. And so this whole facility, this is the real picture I took before I come. So we want to solve this food resilience of Singapore and through innovating food sustainability by aquatech, agri-tech, and food tech. And so this is a multiple-story building. And our food tech will occupy one floor, which is around 1,900 square meters of space. It will house pilot plants, which can produce the future food can be marketed directly to the globe. And also we have R&D laboratories, spin-off company spaces, so this incubators. So this is the facility. I'm well excited because it is a venue to set up joint collaborations between NUS and PolyU under this new facility, which we will move in by middle 2027. So right now is a great time to talk about some solid collaborative plans. And when it opens officially, we can actually move in. And we're also very proud because we got the funding from Bezos Earth Fund, which, as the name indicates, is established by the rich person, Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of Amazon. And he actually donated $100 million to set up this Bezos Earth Fund. And then he took $100 million to establish a sustainable protein research center. And globally, it established 3 Bezos centers. One is in NC State, North Carolina State, where my children are living. And then the second one is in London, Imperial College London. And ours is the third one, the only one in Asia. And so it established all in the year of 2024. Each center got US dollar 30 million for 5 years. And then our vision is to commercialize sustainable proteins through our research efforts. So this is the work we want to actually share with you what we do. And in our center, let me get back. Yeah, in our center, we focus on 3 areas of sustainable proteins. The first one is microalgae protein, which can be cultivated indoor. Because Singapore is a city state, we don't have land, agricultural land. So we can only grow food in a factory, in a bioreactor, in fermenter. So microalgae is a good area to do research because it can be cultivated. And the second area is cultivated meat. Singapore is the pioneering country of cultivated meat because it's the first country authorized the commercialization of this cultivated chicken many years ago. Right now, there are a few other cultivated meat products approved by Singapore Food Agency to be sold in Singapore. And then the third area of sustainable protein, of course, is plant protein, which is the talk of my title. And I'm in charge of that particular plant protein research under Beizhou's center. And so before I jump into the research outcome we did, I want to share with you what our world is actually facing. And there are many grand challenges. One of them is actually the increase of the population. As the UN projected by the year of 2050, we will have like 10 billion people in our Earth. And so the question is, how can we have enough food to feed so many people? And then the second question is actually, it's good and bad because on one hand, we have longer lifespan. But the problem is we typically got chronic diseases when we grow old. Could be diabetes, high blood pressure, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how can we achieve healthy aging? And this is actually one of the major research directions by Singapore government as well. And the third one is actually there are many developing countries, the kids, they don't get enough nutrition. So malnutrition is a big problem, nutritional security. And let's look at all these questions. The first question to solve this challenge, it was suggested that we need to increase the food production by 60% by the year 2050. But we don't have enough agricultural land. So that is the huge challenge. But as a food scientist, we can actually need to look back to see what happened with the food we grow in our agricultural land. The fact is like over 30% of the food from the farmland to our consumer were wasted through different ways, value chains. Could be through the consumers who bought too much food and cannot consume, and then they throw the food away. Or could be in processing of our factory food processing plant, where the wasteful processing practice also contributes a big chunk of the waste. So everything adds up on average, including like fruits and vegetables, which is easily perishable, and roots and tubers, and as well as dairy products and fish and seafood and so on and so forth. So annually, the food wastage lead to economical loss of $2.6 trillion US, according to Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations. And this $2.6 trillion US is equivalent to 5 times of Singapore annual GDP, which is around 5,000 billion US dollars, a humongous amount of food wastage. And so let's zoom in to look at how we waste our food in our food processing practice that has been in place over hundreds of years, including beer brewing, for example. You throw away the so-called spent barley grains. Because in the beer brewing, we extract this starch and then ferment them into alcohol. But along the way, we dump the proteins and fiber as the spent barley grain, which ends up as animal feed or fertilizer. And the same thing for like in China, we brew alcohol like baijiu using red sorghum. We are doing the same thing. We extract the starch, and then we throw away the spent grains, which is enriched with proteins and fiber. And in the United States, they brew this bioethanol, which can be added into gasoline by 5% according to US law. And then they end up with the so-called DDGS, which is the dried distillers grain, which is solubles. It's a huge waste and end up with landfill. And then you look at the other food processing industry, it's equally wasteful. For example, oil seed oil, like this sunflower oil, peanut oil, and so on and so forth. We squeeze the small percentage of oils from this seed, and we throw away the spent oil meal again, which is enriched in proteins, fiber, and many other micronutrients. And the third one is our starch processing plant. For example, like sweet potato starch noodle, people like to eat very much. And also this mung bean noodle. And again, in this processing, we take the plant seeds, which are concentrated with proteins, fiber, micronutrients, and minerals, and so on and so forth. We wash away we wash out the starch through multiple complex processings, and we only collect the starch. Along the way, we throw away the good ingredients as the waste co-product. So such a wasteful process demands a new solution in order to achieve food sustainability. So this is the big area for food scientists to work on, to come up with innovative solutions that can achieve zero waste. And so where are those waste materials go? And it goes to this website called Feedipedia. I don't know if you have checked out this website. It's the website collect all the data for animal feed. And I looked through it, and you can see this barley distillery byproduct of spent barley grain. And it has a crude protein of 20% and fiber like 17%. And for whole barley, the protein content is only 10%, but after the starch is removed, the protein is enriched. So it's high protein feed for animal. So we often say animals eat better food than our human being. One reason. And the second example is a sunflower meal. Again, it contains a very high protein, like 32%, and crude fiber of 28%, and because it's defected. And so all this, there are numerous other examples. We know we are very wasteful, and Singapore government also knows. So in 2019, Singapore government actually started a campaign to promote a circular economy. Of course, circular economy can refer to many other practices, for example, reuse, recycle, and so on and so forth. But it's maybe easier to do for this electronic materials and papers. But for our food science, what can we do? We need to come up with innovative zero waste processing to claim those valuables from these so-called spent materials, which are actually food grade, including spent barley grains and DDGS. One example we did was we upcycled this particular group of protein called prolamine. This prolamine is the protein found in our grains, including corn, barley, wheat, and rye, and sorghum, and so on and so forth. And unlike many other proteins, this prolamine is alcohol soluble. You can extract them using like aqueous alcohol solutions. And the other advantage for this prolamine is, unlike other protein, when it is denatured, it is not reversible. This alcohol soluble prolamine is actually reversible. You can dissolve them back into solution and solidify them and dissolve them back, and then it will regain its own conformations. So the first example we did to upcycle this is barley grain. This is zero-starch noodle, as Professor Chen mentioned. We would collaborate with the Singapore food manufacturer Nestle. You probably drink this Milo, which is made from this barley from the barley malt, and then they throw away this barley grain. We extract this protein fiber powder to convert them into zero-starch noodle, as well as other products, including bread and rice. But we can also extract this prolamine, holding in particular from Span barley grain, and then from this DDGS, which is made from corn, and into very high purity. And we apply this very advanced electrohydrodynamic jet printer we built in our lab, in our Suzhou Research Institute. And then we can use this to 3D print a high-resolution scaffold, which is made of 100% prolamine. And so this scaffold itself is edible. It's just not very tasty, but it's a food grade. And then we can use it as a meat culture to grow this the first piece of cultured pork in our lab, and successfully. So we expand our search to other prolamines, including this gliadin, holding, cyclin, and so on and so forth. The beauty of this prolamine was its molecular weight, relatively speaking, not so complicated. For example, zinc mainly contains alpha zinc. And for holding, again, is holding C is the majority of the protein. And for cyclin, it's also have only, it's a majority of gamma cyclin, which is molecular weight of around 40 K Dalton. And so this is a very useful material. So as I just mentioned, we take these proteins and then we do a 3D printing to get this scaffold. And then we inoculate or we plant this animal cell of this scaffold, and then we can do meat culture in our lab. So this was the first example we published a few years ago. But the 3D printing is hard to scale up. So we actually use the same material to make this micro beads, and in large scale. Right now we can make these micro beads in kilograms in our lab, and then we apply this micro bead as a carrier to grow fat cells as well as the muscle cells of the pork. And then after that, we do a 3D bioprinting of these cultivated materials, cells and biomass, and then we can print this marbled cultivated meat, which is more like the pork we see in our daily life. So we need to use a combination of this technology. And so our micro bead we can easily make using solution process, and by very simple technology, we can achieve the very narrow particle size. And one beauty for this zinc is it can hydrate. The surface can be hydrated when you put the bead, dried bead into water, into, for example, cell culture media. The diameter can expand to around 200 micron. And this is the exact size we need, ideal size we need for meat culture, because the cells can attach on this kind of micro bead very well. If the micro bead is too small, then the cell won't attach to it. If it's too large, then the efficiency is not very good. So this 200 micrometer size, the bead is the best. And so we actually can demonstrate this meat culture in a lab scale bioreactor system, and to inoculate or actually seed this stem cells, particularly pulsing satellite cells on our bead, and then we let it grow and to a certain amount after 6 days. And then we can actually trigger the differentiations by adding horse serum to convert this muscle satellite cells into microtube structures, and successfully this way. And then we can also apply the same bead to grow animal fat, because our scaffold is plotting. So we actually need animal fat tissue, so inoculate to actually induce this fat tissue, and which will be important for the flavor. And so this kind of hybrid meat is what we want to actually achieve. For this fat cells, again, we need to induce these differentiations by adding some growth factors like insulin, and could also add some other drugs. That is actually current bottleneck, because eventually we need to ensure that we don't use any pharmaceutical agent in the meat culture, because otherwise the safety could be a problem. So because of the time, I will skip these details and of the mechanism of this cell growth and differentiations. After we get this cultivated biomass, then we can assemble 3D bioprintable ink by combination of mung bean protein, and then and we can print the different shapes of this steak that are ready to be consumed. And so this combination of bioprinting and cell culture, we can achieve the piece of meat like steak-like, and then the nutritional values of our product are comparable to the pork belly in terms of this protein content. You know, for example, like pork belly meat or 五花肉, the protein content is 15%. Our 3D printed cultured meat, we have protein of 13%. But the difference is that ours are much lower in fat, only 1.5%. And then this pork belly is a high fat. Many of you may not want to eat it because of high fat content. But if you eat our cultivated meat, you don't have that kind of issue anymore. And so we compare the other parameters, including the texture in terms of hardness, chewiness, springiness, and cohesiveness. They are comparable to the pork belly. And we are waiting to make a large amount to do human sensory evaluations at this moment. Okay, so that's one example of harvesting or upcycle this prolamins from the spent grains, including corn and barley and so on and so forth. But there are many other plant proteins out there, and we want to look into deeper what we can do with those proteins. So why we want to work on proteins, we claim is so-called sustainable, right? So this is the chart. I got the data from this Good Food Institute. The whole idea of this so-called plant protein is because it has a low greenhouse emission compared to beef, because if beef is the benchmark of 100%, the plant proteins, like they are very low, like 3% for groundnut or peanut, and then the tofu, you know, only 3.2%, and dried peas and pulses and nuts, you know. So all these plant proteins, the carbon footprint is negligible compared to the animal-based meat. And so, but there are so many plant proteins, so what can we do about them? We say that we can claim them for cultivated meat, but why not just directly convert the plant proteins into meat mimics or the food we like to eat? That is certainly a challenge, because the plant proteins are typically globular, and then the taste may not be very nice. It could be beanie flavor, or could be other plant flavors we do like very much. So that is the technological challenge we need to overcome. And secondly, is extractions of the plant proteins could be quite complicated in certain cases. So we actually develop this zero-waste green extraction technology, where not only isolate the proteins in very high functionality, with high functionality from this different kind of seeds. We also claim the starch and fiber, insoluble fiber in particular, and also juice concentrate, which includes those water-soluble nutrients like phytochemicals, minerals, and so on and so forth. So because the whole being, it's all edible, we don't want to waste any one of them. And so that's our philosophy. And we have this invention disclosure. We licensed to a local company to produce mung bean protein in particular. So we look at all the different proteins, including like a pumpkin seed protein, and mung bean protein, and but the challenge is we can get the protein, but we need to formulate into the food we like to eat. So how do we do it? The first example is to use our 3D food printer in this case, extrusion-based printer. We use red lentil to extract the red lentil protein, because the red lentil protein have this natural orange color, which look very much like the salmon fish color. And so this color came together with the protein. We didn't add any synthetic coloring pigment or even a natural pigment. So it's a natural protein color agent. And then we formulate the salmon by incorporating the lipid phase by omega-3 fatty acid from the plant. For example, like from chia seed or from this perilla oil. And so that we can actually increase the nutritional values, and we can print the shape very much like a piece of salmon. So this is one successful example. We have a patent application on it. And then we need to look at the other example, which is pumpkin seed proteins, because I know everybody likes to eat pumpkin seed once in a while. But in the food industry, the pumpkin seed are mainly used to produce pumpkin seed oil. And in that process, the pumpkin seed protein was wasted. I had a chance to visit those factories, and it is a huge amount of waste because the spent oil seed meal is no longer edible. But this pumpkin seed have a very high protein content, up to 45% for certain type of pumpkin seeds. But it is underutilized. Not much research actually spent on this pumpkin seed. The pumpkin seed protein is interesting because the protein composition is mainly like albumin and globulin, mainly globulin, like 11S globulin. And so this is the protein we actually look at in deeper. And so can you see this is the pumpkin seed SDS page of these two bands. One is this 11S globulin, and the other one is the albumin. And so the other unique feature for pumpkin seed protein compared to other plant protein was it has a very high arginine content. As you know, arginine as the amino acid is very important for our human nutrition. And pumpkin seed protein contains as high as 14% arginine. And it's the highest among all the other plant proteins we actually quantified so far. And the third unique feature for pumpkin seed protein was it contains the tripeptide called arginine, glycine, and aspartic acid, or RGD, in short. This tripeptide is a well-known tripeptide to attach the cell onto the surface. So this pumpkin seed protein is ideal protein to make microbeads or scaffolds for cell culture applications. And fourth one is this pumpkin seed protein is a very good chelation property. It's comparable to gelatin. And we actually reported the work last year. So this pumpkin seed protein is basically, I don't know where the, oh, here. Yeah, so it's actually very much like this vegetable-based gelatin. And so that is the property we are exploring right now. And so we took this advantage. We can actually do many food product developments, including this meat culture as well as plant-based meat formulations. So we take advantage of this gelatin mimic property of pumpkin seed protein. We were able to print this seafood, this Arctic like this pork belly as well as this seafood by simple 3D printing. And yeah, this is the highlight. And so on top of that, this pumpkin seed protein also contains a very good amount of tryptophan. As you know, if you eat lots of proteins containing high tryptophan, it will make you sleepy, right? And many of you have sleeping problem. I think pumpkin seed protein is a great one to try. And so I feel this pumpkin seed protein have good potential to be utilized as the plant protein seafood mimics, including this Arctic shellfish. And more recently, we use the pumpkin seed protein to mimic this wagon sea cucumber. And this wagon sea cucumber looks very much like real because you can buy this mold from the market, and then you put our gel into it, and then you can make this wagon sea cucumber. And we actually apply this micronutrient iron supplement on the surface to give this dark color. And we did this analysis of our wagon sea cucumber compared to the real sea cucumber. You can easily see the advantage of our wagon sea cucumber. We don't have cholesterol, so it's zero cholesterol. And we, in our case, we induce this iron as the micronutrient as well as this dietary fiber. And of course, the cost of our wagon sea cucumber is only 1/10 of the real sea cucumber. And yeah, so that one, I think my student who work on this, she spun off a company trying to commercialize this sea cucumber technology. The last example I want to mention is actually mung bean proteins we can upcycle from the mung bean starch industry. So we convert this mung bean, whole mung bean through zero-waste processing technology. We can reclaim the starch, we can get the protein, and then we can formulate into two types of products. One is this plant-based abalone, and our Fujian people really like abalone, particularly those from Putian. And then we can use our protein to formulate mung bean protein drink, very high protein content, as high as 30 grams per serving. Because our protein have very good water solubility, you can disperse them to very high concentrations. It took us many trial and errors to develop this. I want to skip. My poor research fellow, Dr. Liu Yunjiao's worked very hard. And eventually, she was successful, so we can actually commercialize this product. You can find them in some of the Singapore restaurants, like this Japanese style restaurant, even Philippine style restaurant. They are selling this vegan abalone dish. And our vegan abalone have higher protein content compared to the real abalone. And the texture may be even better because the real abalone is rubberish, chewy, very chewy, but not everybody like it. And so put together, this year we are able to make this vegan pong choy. You know, I'm from Fujian. Every Chinese New Year in Singapore, this is the must dish to have, and very expensive. And we can make them sustainable by using plant proteins. So we can not only have high protein, we introduce a high fiber and zero cholesterol. And most importantly, price parity, which is one of the key objectives for Beizhou's Center of Sustainable Protein. So this was our feature on this the major Singapore newspaper, 联合早报. In this year's Chinese New Year celebration season, and I think 初三, so it's a great time to 给新加坡人拜年哦. Yeah, it's our research achievement, so I feel very excited. Yeah, so that's what we have learned so far of plant proteins to be upvalued into seafood mimic. I don't know how much time I have. And oh, 10 minutes left. Okay, sorry. I need to rush really fast for my second part. Or maybe, yeah, so now I want to share with you this functional staple food. And I was born in 1967, nothing to hide, you know. And so in my age, in China that time, people didn't have enough food to eat. I don't know about Professor Cheng when you were young, it's the same thing, you know. We have nothing to eat during this spring time in particular. We call it Qing Huang Bu Jie. And so what do? We rely on sweet potato. And so this is the sweet potato rice, we call it, but actually it's the residue of the sweet potato starch production. So we take the sweet potato, we wash out the starch, and all the solid residues, we dry them under the sun, and then we, during this food shortage, we eat this residue. We call it a sweet potato rice, but it's not very tasty, to be honest. And then in the 80s, we finally got enough rice to eat. We do no longer eat this so-called sweet potato rice. Actually, it's all the fibrous part of the sweet potato. And then we can eat enough. But as our country developed over the past 40 years, we can eat very good food with plenty of supplies, lots of meat and seafood and fruits and vegetables. We can enjoy our eating very much after year 2000. And by now, our aim is to eat healthy food. So this is our objective. But the problem we need to ask ourselves, do we really have healthy diet? That's the big question. I don't know about you, but I think many of you cannot say you eat healthy food in a daily basis, right? Because we may be too busy. And of course, then you need to look at maybe the reason. And actually our country, also the US government, they are very concerned about the health of the citizens. In our country, our government have this Chinese food guide pagoda or 膳食宝塔. And in the United States, they have this food guide pyramid. So more or less the similar thing. But on both countries, they all emphasize the consumption of this staple food like rice and bread and this sweet potatoes and potatoes as the main staple food, and then vegetables and meat and so on and so forth, very little oil and salt. And in the US side, it's the same, you know. The base of the pyramid is also bread, cereal, rice, pasta, and it's basically carbohydrate. And then plus vegetable, and then meat, yogurt, dairy products. That's the difference from US pyramid compared to Chinese food guide pagoda. And otherwise, they are very similar. So if you follow this guideline, you will end up with this overloaded of carbohydrate. But although the government wanted to eat less oil, and in fact, we ate too much oily food because they are tasty. And then we actually didn't eat enough protein, good quality proteins, particularly plant proteins. Our fiber intake is certainly below the recommended amount. In China, for example, the government recommends our daily fiber intake to be like 25 to 30 grams of dietary fiber, but on average, we only take in 10 grams. So that's a huge gap. For the proteins, we may eat a lot of meat, but the quality of the protein may not be ideal. And because the meat contains a lot of oil, that could be the reason why we consume too much oil. So it's certainly not a balanced diet. One indication of such a diet is we have a lot of so-called non-communicable diseases occurrence rate. In China, in the past 25 years, this so-called NCD actually doubled from 1993 to 2018. And globally, it's even a bigger problem for diabetes. And it's the so-called 富贵病, right? As the country wealth increase, the diabetes occurrence prevalence also increases dramatically, particularly in our country. Of course, in Singapore, it's already a very big problem for type 2 diabetes in particular. And the other problem is obesity. And in the United States, for example, in 1975, the obesity rate is only 15%. Now, it's actually close to 45%. So this is a direct indication to saying that the government dietary pyramid is really misleading, right? To make us very big, fat, and unhealthy. For our country, the obesity rate also increasing rapidly for many other reasons, but compared to the US, it's not as bad. But then we need to look at our human history in much longer perspective. And do we have to eat a lot of carbohydrate? Maybe not the case, because in our early human evolution, if you look at early days, it's basically foraging the food until the modern food industry kick in, right? Then we do food processing so that we can refine the food, only give you the starch and throw away the micronutrients and proteins and fibers. Therefore, we end up with is unhealthy food due to the food industry. And even traditionally, we also, our mouth, we like to eat this type of food, soft, glutinous, fragrant, and sweet. All these food are my favorite food because these are the food in my hometown, particularly in Chinese New Year. This is my older brother, making this, we call it 糍粑. In every holiday, we will make this. And on daily basis, we eat a lot of rice, and just like this in my home. And all these are high carbohydrate, very low protein, and no fiber at all. And I think many of you, like me, like this type of food. And that's the reason we eat ourselves into type 2 diabetes, into obesity. And in Singapore, it's the same. And many years ago, Singapore newspaper, this is Straits Times, published a paper to say that the rice we eat, one bowl of rice in terms of the glycemic index, it's equivalent to 2 cans of Coke. So which is basically saying this rice, white rice in particular, is very bad carbohydrate, very low quality carbohydrate. But unfortunately, we like to eat them. I think the time is almost up. We need to jump, 2 minutes left. So I will skip this, how we actually produce this so-called low glycemic index food by adding so-called starch hydrolase inhibitors with green. Our lab is green this botanicals. We collected over 1,000 samples in tropical botanical Singapore Healing Garden and Sarawak Biodiversity Center, and also fruits and vegetables. We screen these bioactives to inhibit the starch digestions, hopefully to reduce the so-called glycemic index. And then we found this lady's finger seed has the active compound. And then we develop a product by adding okra or lady's finger seed into our rice starch to make Hefeng. Everybody like it. But we can inhibit the starch digestion, but the problem is it tastes astringent. So nobody would eat it in a daily basis. Although it is effective. We did a clinical study, and it is also very good to control the blood insulin level, also can lower down the glycemic response, so on and so forth. But if the taste is bad, then nobody will eat it. So even though, and also it's quite expensive, and I don't think people can enjoy eating this kind of food. We can convert high GI food like rice, noodle into low GI food by just mixing this lady's finger seed as it is. And but it is not a solution for commercial company because of the other problems. And so what is our solutions? We need to look at our fundamentals because, as I said, our imbalanced diet is too much carbohydrate, not enough good quality protein and fiber. So we need to solve this problem from the fundamental. So now is this year, the US government, they finally flipped the pyramid upside down. So now we need to eat high protein, high fiber, and low carbohydrate food. I'm not saying this will be the correct guideline until maybe 50 years later. Maybe there are other kind of chronic disease coming out if we follow this. But I think the idea is we need to balance our macronutrient by incorporating more protein and fiber and reduce the amount of carbohydrate. So to do that, I changed my research directions a few years ago before the US government flipped the pyramid. So I traveled many places from Jiangsu, our Suzhou Research Institute, to Shandong, Neimenggu, Qinghai, Sichuan, and all the places. And we visited many food processing plants, including this sweet potato noodle processing plant, world the largest one actually. And then Qinghai, this Qingke Limai, and also this the pumpkin seed processing plant. And eventually, I was able to convince investors to invest a factory in Hubei, in Wuhan, China. I just tell them to build a factory which can do mixings. I don't do any high-tech stuff. I just know the art of mixing. I got all this good protein, fiber, and carbohydrate sources from the different food processing plant. And then we ask our investor to mix in that plant. And then we produce the first premix called this Lekang Yihaofen. And so this idea is like, I really think back. You don't need to do high tech for food innovation. You just need to follow the mother nature, or 道法自然, like 道德经 told us. And I like to read 道德经 on the airplane when I travel. I really think it has lots of great wisdom. And so that is the noodle we are selling right now. High protein noodle using a premix and high fiber. So this noodle, 100 grams, the protein content is equal to 5 eggs. And the fiber, 13 grams, is equivalent to like 100 grams of this broccoli. And then carbohydrate is much lower, only 25 grams, only 1/3 of ordinary noodle. And so this noodle is also environmentally friendly because we are using those materials that the factory originally thrown them away. I told them to process it according to my instructions, and then so they are very good purity for food grade use. So this is the noodle we developed. We have it clinically proven to show the glycemic index value is very low, it's only 38. Much lower than the 55 cutoff of so-called low GI food by this Temasek Polytechnic Glycemic Index Research Unit. And then we also, I use myself as the 小白鼠, a guinea pig, and then I compare my noodle versus this buckwheat noodle. And for the buckwheat noodle, people promote it as a so-called controlled blood glucose, but to me, it didn't work well because my blood glucose after I consume the buckwheat noodle, it shoots up by 6 units and stays there for a very long time because of the high carbohydrate load, which is the big problem. And then I gave my noodle to my friends, including my brother, my college teacher who have high diabetes. They consume my noodle, the blood glucose change won't increase by 2 units. So it's very good to control blood glucose. The reason is quite clear because we have low carbohydrate content, but high protein and high fiber content, which is good for the gut health. And we also did the consumer satiety test. Our noodle is very good to maintain the fullness. After 2 hours, you still feel not hungry. And so that's the reason every lunch right now in Singapore, I eat my own noodle as lunch because it can keep my body fit. And then what important is it tasteful? And our clinical study also saw not too bad, if for the taste palatability, if the 7 is the full mark, our score is 4.7. So there was room to improve, but it's actually not too bad. People can accept. And these are consumer feedback. I think we really like our products. And because it can help diabetes, pre-diabetes, and the people who enjoy low-calorie diets and high fiber. And most proud, my noodle won this Singapore Institute of Food Science Technology Best Product Award this year, just actually last month. I was really fortunate to receive this award. We beat the other 25 competitors, and so our noodle was selected for this 26-28 year. So our noodle will represent Singapore to attend this year's IU First World Food Congress in Hong Kong. So hopefully I will come here to receive a bigger award. That would be great, right? And yeah, that's my happy moment. I think it's worthy to publish many papers for this award. And so these are the messages from the panels of this award selection committee. So the comment was saying that our noodle is a softly developed product that successfully balances health, convenience, taste, and sustainability, making it a deserving winner at the SIFST Food Product Award. And so I'm very grateful for that support and certainly very thankful. But we do not stop at the noodle. We actually further develop our this premix into instant noodle. And we will try to market this product very soon. And we also made instant rice and with this premix. So all these are high protein, high fiber, low carbohydrate, diabetes friendly, and very attractive to the people who want to concern about muscle loss, or bodybuilders who want to read. And we give our premix into my student, my PhD student, who made this birthday cake for me using my premix, and high protein, high fiber, low carbohydrate. So she's a certified baking technologist, and so she can do a lot of bakery product, including bagel. And then we also make cookies out of it. Our company called All Joy Health in Hubei province. And then we tested the glucose response by our friend who is the director of a bank in Wuhan. And he has diabetes, so he volunteers to test this glycemic response of our food. And this is very tasty peach crisp or taosu, and it's diabetic friendly. And then we work with Prof HUANG, very famous Humao Bingye. They take our flour to make this very attractive bread and also the beautiful cake, and with high protein, high fiber. So we want to continue on with our Humao Bingye, and so hopefully we can enjoy those delicious food. So in conclusion, I think I want to emphasize our message of we want to develop a future food, staple food in particular, by balance the nutrients and make sure it is perfect in color, aroma, and taste. And then use the material that is sustainable. So sustainable development for the earth. And then consumers eat our food, they should feel 100% happiness. We call in Chinese called 福杯满溢, or 幸福感拉满. Yeah, so finally, I want to thank my funding agency, including National Research Foundation of Singapore, Ministry of Education, Amway, Bezos Earth Fund, and Singapore Food Agency, and our Taiwanese collaborator, Agregata, who fund our research project, and many of my collaborators in China, Singapore, and worldwide. And lastly, I really want to thank my students my group is huge, and I want them to publish Nature papers actually. So Nature here we come, but instead of publishing Nature paper, they go to walk around in the park to watch the bird. And yeah, so without these hardworking and smart young students, I have nothing to share with you. I really appreciate their hard work, and I have the opportunity to attend this COP30 in Brazil to promote the sustainability, sustainable proteins on behalf of Singapore as a nation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Professor Huang, for your fantastic talk. So Professor Huang just introduced about his research work on the alternative protein and using the alternative protein to produce some novel foods, as well as his own experience from transition from a scientist to an entrepreneur. So next, let's only thanks Professor Huang again for his talk. Thanks so much, Professor Huang.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. So next, let's do the Q&A session. So in the meeting room, anyone has any question for Professor Huang? Yeah, please.
Testing. Thank you so much, Professor Huang, for your very interesting lecture. I have several questions. First, how much does it cost for your noodle pro taco?
Yeah, for the taco, yeah.
Yeah, how much does it cost?
Oh, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
Actually, it's the price is very friendly. It's like in Singapore, right? We sold it around $3 Singapore.
For one pack?
Yeah, one pack, 80 grams.
80 grams.
80 grams. Yeah, that's the pack size because that's already a good amount for boys. You know, for me, I can eat one pack. It's after I cook, it's a big pile. And for ladies, you may not be able to finish the 80 grams. Yeah.
Yeah, 80 grams is not a lot, but I'm just thinking that when compared to traditional normal noodles, of course, they are not as good as yours, but this is quite expensive.
Yeah, I certainly agree. The price right now, compared to ordinary noodle, is not comparable. But if you compare our noodle with the other similar product claiming for granddaddy for diabetes, our price actually are much lower than those products. Yeah.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you grow animal cell on protein scaffolding to produce
hybrid meat.
Yeah, high protein meat.
Yeah.
So is this a standard technology? Because I'm just thinking of all the protein plant-based meat that is available in the market. One of it is, if I remember correctly, is called OmniPork, something like that.
OmniPork, yeah. I know that one.
Is it using the same technology? Because if it is, then I think that it cannot be claimed as a vegetarian food because you grow animal cell on it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, if you are using animal cell to cultivate the fat or the muscle, certainly it's not 100% vegetarian food because you have the animal sourced cells in it. Yeah, so that is certainly one issue. And for vegetarian or for those vegans, you don't want to have this kind of cultivated meat product, which is still animal origin. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I just wonder if this is the standard technology for the available plant-based meat in the market. If yes, then I think they may have to make sure that their label will not confuse consumers, because
that's right.
Right now there's no such information.
Actually, you don't need to worry about it because for ordinary plant protein, 100% plant protein based food, the price is much lower than those contain this cultivated meat. And so they don't want to claim plant-based meat if it has cultivated meat. So they would rather add 3% of cultivated meat with plant protein to claim it's actually cultivated because the price is much higher. You see? Yeah.
Right.
So maybe until one day the cultivated meat becomes so cheap. I don't know if that will happen or not, but at this moment, your concern is not an issue. Yeah.
May not.
Yeah.
Right. My last question is about the carbon footprint. Now, if you compare the raw original type of generic food, on equal footing, like beef compared with, say, soybean.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, the carbon footprint is much lower for
Yeah.
plant-based
Yeah.
protein or plant-based food. But for your function, whether it's functional food or protein based plant-based protein meat, it's all very heavily processed, although it may not be bad. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's heavily processed. And because of this, the carbon footprint may not be as favorable as the raw type of generic food. So I just wonder if have you actually work out the carbon footprint for the meat that is processed by your method for more complete comparison of
Yeah,
carbon footprint.
that's a great question, actually. We have been working on this life cycle analysis of plant proteins. Yeah, the processing certainly can contribute a big chunk in terms of the energy consumption, environmental impact. And so we're actually building this life cycle analysis database for the plant proteins, 100 different plant proteins. And we want to actually work out which one processing conditions are the major contributors to this greenhouse gas, environmental impacts, and so on and so forth. But for the cultivated meat right now, the issue is we don't have the data for this large-scale cultivations. And so it's a bit too early to conduct a life cycle analysis. I think in the future, certainly this has to be done. And because eventually it's what we eat into our body that matters. You know, the end product from the raw material to the end product, there were lots of energy and whatever involved in production of those end products. Yeah, to be fair. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Professor Huang, for your answer. And so any other question? Yeah, the end, please. Just wait for a while.
How about the proliferation of GMO crops? Has it been affecting or has there been maybe a bias or discriminatory attitude towards these GMO issue?
You mean GMO crops like GMO soybean? Am I correct? Yeah. GMO certainly is a major issue, but we didn't really compare the non-GMO and GMO from our study. And for the plant protein, the GMO, the main concern right now is actually soya protein and also corn. Because in the US, there were lots of GM corn, which people develop for making bioethanol. And then that some of the GMO corn is not intended for human consumptions. And for soya protein, is certainly a different matter because we have been consuming GMO soya protein for a very long time, at least for the soya oil. And it's mainly like China import lots of soybean from the United States, and they are basically all GMO soybean for soybean oil productions. Yeah. So it's an issue. I think very controversial. So I don't want to put too much my personal opinion to it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Rowe. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the fantastic talk. So I have one question about the pumpkin seed. So you mentioned you're using the pumpkin protein, they kind of behave like gelatin. So my question is this kind of pumpkin seed, they have any like patch-to-patch effect, or if different species of pumpkin seed, they have different properties?
Yeah, that's a great question for our food scientist. When we select the raw material to study, I always ask my students to trace back to what is the cultivar, the species, because it is certainly a biodiversity question. We certainly can see almost every agricultural crop, the nutritional compositions varies among the different cultivars and or could be even year by year, because the weather and always have an impact. We will collaborate with a professor in Zhejiang University, who is the Professor Bao Jinsong, and he is the expert in pumpkin plant agriculture. So he has many this pumpkin seed samples. So we did comparative studies. But eventually, which one can be commercialized? We cannot look at the laboratory samples. We have to look at what has been grown in a larger volume that we can purchase from. And we compare the different type of pumpkin seeds, and we found certain pumpkin seeds have much higher quality proteins and higher contents of proteins. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, one more question. So another thing about the blend, the starch, your noodles. Okay, yeah. You also applied it for different kinds of cooking methods. I just wondered, what about the cooking condition? Will your powder have any sort of bottleneck in cooking condition, like the temperature or?
Oh, you mean a noodle, right?
Yeah.
Certainly cooking the time and temperature, of course, we typically boil, so it's about 100 degrees. But cooking time, for those who like to have softer texture, you let it cook a little longer. For those who like to have more hard and chewy texture, you can cook like a shorter time, maybe 4 minutes or 5 minutes. But the good thing for the noodle politico is even you cook very long, it does not actually melt or smear into a paste. It maintains the structure very well. And after you take it out and leave it in a bowl, it does not actually stick together like ordinary Dutch noodle. You put it in a bowl, after you let it cool, it will actually all become one big bowl. But in political noodle, it is well behaved.
Thank you.
Maybe, yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I actually have a question very similar to Nathan's. So I wonder what would be the QC for the premixed powders?
Oh, the QC, you mean all the quality control?
Yes, because like those, I noticed that many of those crops may contain beta glucan, right? That's why the DGI.
Yeah.
And so the QC would be focused on, like let's say the carbohydrate percentage, protein percentage, or more specifically, like percentage of the beta glucans, for instance. I have no idea what is done.
Yeah, the QC, what we do to ensure consistency of each batch, it was we trace back to our raw material supplier. We specifically want one particular kind of, for example, the flour we got is this Highland barley or chinke from the largest chinke suppliers. We only one particular type. And so we guarantee it's the same type of chinke they supply it to us. And then they need to send us the certificate or analysis to make sure the protein content, the starch content, and all the other quality control parameters are consistent. And for the others, we do the same thing. We, for example, we got this this fiber from sweet potato starch noodle maker, and they actually have their own cultivar. So you guarantee the material are consistent. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for your talk. I just want some clarification on that proteagle noodle.
Yeah, political. Okay.
Can you clarify on its like main ingredients? Because I remember there is like no particular size like that highlighting its main ingredients.
Yeah, that's actually it's written in a package ingredient list, but I forgot to bring a noodle today. I have some in my hotel, and yeah, I can tell you what it is. Basically, it's like Highland barley, gluten, and then sweet potato powder, peanut powder. It's all listed there. It's 100%. Clean label compliant. We didn't add anything like synthetic, like this so-called resistant starch or this chemically modified starch and so on and so forth. It's a very clean ingredient, only 4 of them. Yeah.
One follow-up question on this ingredient. Is it like, for example, the barley grains, is it the upcycled one from?
No. Actually, we didn't use the upcycled barley grain because that one is only for other use or not in this particular political. We use the whole barley grain or 全麦粉. Yeah, and it's not upcycled. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But for the peanut, for example, it's a defatted peanut. It's because for noodle, it's always fat-free because otherwise the noodle will develop rancidity very quickly. And yeah. Oh, back.
Well, yeah. Hello, Professor Huang. Thanks for your presentation. I think it's really wonderful. And then creating some very creative research topic for the future. And then, well, I'm right now quite hungry, but so like it's making me like thinking about.
Oh, I forgot to bring my noodles.
How to
I'll tell later. Yeah.
So yeah, from my kind of imagination, it's like when you are making the noodle with different food, I mean protein-based food, it was similar flavor, like a pumpkin flavor noodle.
Yeah.
Well, but I cannot imagine about pumpkin flavor meat. So
that's a good question.
Would that
Actually,
be attractive issue, like the different type of the plant-based extractives over, because you are using the alcohol as a solvent. I guess it's cannot preventing the extractives to be mixing together, right?
well, actually, I need to clarify. Yeah, you mentioned about pumpkin. Let's answer the pumpkin question first. Because the pumpkin protein, we actually isolated from this pumpkin seed, not the whole pumpkin, because whole pumpkin, the edible part we typically eat don't have high protein content, but the pumpkin seed has high protein content. But the problem is for the pumpkin seed, it also have very high oil content. So what we do is we would send the pumpkin seed to a food factory which have the facility to do defatting service. And so they will strip off the fat. And so when we use the defatted pumpkin, I'm telling you all my secret. Maybe I need to shut up. And my student will kill me. And then we purify the protein and into a very high purity. Then the beauty for the pumpkin seed protein is it has no strange taste. It has no pumpkin taste. It's a very clean taste. So it's great to make the seafood. I can let you try our vegan this sea cucumber. It tastes really like the real one. No pumpkin taste at all. I can guarantee you because I was fooled because I couldn't tell if it's real or fake.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to try it. And then, but well, I was planning to ask another question is regarding to the lignin. So like you also lignin.
Oh,
Lignin. Yeah.
lignin.
Lignin in the extractives, aromatics compounds.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that's your work. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Yeah, I'm wondering like whether you are going to make use of that or like is this existing staying in the noodles or yeah, how do you treat that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I don't want to use lignin in my as an ingredient in our noodle because the lignin, as you know, it's insoluble. We still may classify them under insoluble fiber, but it's certainly not very digestible in even in our gut. And so for high lignin containing part of the plant, like the shells, you cannot eat them. And so for the glands, the whole bean, we can eat them. The lignin content is very, very low. And so they are more like other type of fibers containing sugars. And so if it is has high lignin content, maybe I need to think twice because it may have, we may not be able to digest them. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Due to time limit, because the online audience also has some questions, and so I propose one question want to ask Professor Huang, and the question is: you talk about the plant protein, right, and the starch and dietary fiber, and these food ingredients actually has some interaction in the food.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's the mechanism just for these three food ingredients?
The interaction.
Yeah, their interaction and how this interaction can actually influence the texture and their digestion and absorption characteristics of the such as your noodles, the staple food.
Wow, this is a very professional question. And certainly the person asking this question is an expert in this field. Yeah, actually, I'm a chemist, so I look at everything at the molecular structures and things like that. So to me, right, ordinary noodle is made of two very important material. One is proteins, like gluten protein, and the other is starch. So if you look at the interactions of protein and starch, in terms of the chemical interactions, they don't really have any covalent bond interactions. They, at the most, have hydrogen bonding interactions, let's say it this way. But from a macroscopic point of view, if you look at the noodle as a human, noodle, the bond is the gluten, because the gluten forms the network. And then the starch is the meat, is the filler, and then it makes the noodle springy and chewy. And if you strip the noodle, the starch from the noodle will be very hard because it's a gluten network and it's very hard to bite and chew. It won't be tasty at all. So the combination of the gluten plus the starch make the noodle we enjoy, everybody enjoy, right? And with all this springiness and so on and so forth, and mouthfeels, and so that is the very important to combine them in the right way so that we have the right texture and eating experience. And yeah, so that's my way of looking at it, because the starch is globular. It's like a circular particles. This gluten network is fibrous structures, as you may aware. And so this starch molecule fill in all the gaps between the fibrous gluten to give you the noodle structures. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. Okay. So due to the time limit, our seminar will end here. So finally, let's thank Professor Huang again for his wonderful talk. Okay. Thank you so much for
you
your
very much.
also.
To express our appreciation to Professor Huang, we make this plaque for you with your lecture title and name on that. All right, then thank you everyone for coming here. Now the seminar is adjourned. Thank you.